So today, basically, we will wrap it all up, or we will give a lecture which will connect all previous lectures into God's willing, one unity of knowledge. So, the title of our morning presentation is basically Modernity and Modernation, the Balkan Jews in New National States. Post-Ottoman Balkans Reconstruction. Okay, there is a subtitle, so it's tradition. No, the title was right. Tradition, moderation, and modernity. The Jews of the post-Ottoman Balkans reconstructing their identity. Now, what does that mean, reconstructing their identity? The same way you come to Israel and then in your identity card it doesn't say Israeli. It says whether Jewish or Arab or something else, right? Because we differentiate between nationality and ethnicity and so on, and not all Jews are Israelis and not all Israelis are Jews and so on. But after living so many years in the state of Israel, there is certainly, especially those of us who have Israeli children, do know how Israeli culture is something that now really exists, and it's different than what diaspora culture. Well, it is one Jewish culture, but it's different than the diaspora Jewish culture, certainly. So are the diaspora Jews Jewish? Yes, they are. Are the Israeli Jews Jewish? Yes, they are. Are they same? Certainly not. Now, the same way Israeli identity was reinvented, right? Because we claim connection to the Bible. The Greek identity was reinvented. Now, you know, the Zionist movement was not necessarily extremely religious, certainly not extremely observant. So somebody put it mildly and said, God doesn't exist, and He gave us the land of Israel. Check it in the Torah. Okay? So basically, Zionism on one leg is God doesn't exist, and He gave us the land of Israel. Check in the Torah. Now, why then the movement, which was not necessarily religious, claimed such a profound relation with the Bible? And for justification reasons, you say. Okay, I'm just comparing. The same thing happened over here. Actually, they're the same way the Jews of Europe or Jews of America or Jews of Asia were descendants not of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, rather descendants of their father and mother, grandfather and grandmother, great-grandfather and great-grandmother, right? And you never go more than 3 or 4 generations back. You can see it the best, for example, when we were in Corfu, right? Nobody in the community, well, we met 3 people, but nobody of them knew the famous people from 16th, 17th, 18th century. It was all about one person that everybody knows, you remember? And there was his house, and there was his, there were pictures of him and so on. And then again, if you go, to Sarajevo, for example, you will see that people are very knowledgeable about the prominent people of the last 2 generations. But then nobody would know to tell you who were the famous rabbis of 17th century, of 18th century. Nobody. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that normally nations have illusions of continuity while they actually know only the general story and then in detail last 2 or 3 generations. Now, in the era of nationalism and a recreation of all different nations, small nations appealed to the big nations. And then they also appealed to their taste, to their, to their taste, to their cultural taste, to whatever. So, Bible, what did you say? Why was Bible important for Zionism? Justification. It's not only that, the powers, but it is also that. But the thing is, for example, and now I'm comparing it, and you will see where what I'm getting to. In this part of the world, There was no continuity of Greek mythology. And people who lived in these parts were not called Greek, right? The same way we were not called Israelis in diaspora, unless in few countries, but that's a different story, right?
How were they called?
They were
Ottomans?
No, Rumeiki. Rumeiki.
Rumeiki.
Of course, the Greek-speaking Romans are called Greek-speaking Romans are called Rumeiki, and they are Christians, and they have Christian aesthetics, and they have Christian they have Christian worldview. So they were not into paganism. They didn't like all those statues on which modern Greek identity is based. So Greece reinvented itself, and Greeks reinvented themselves. When they decided that the capital will be Athena. Athena was a village, totally unimportant. Present-day Athena was totally unimportant amongst the Romaiki of Ottoman Empire, right? There were much more important cities, but Athena had classical history, which was very appealing to whom? To Western powers. We all remember how at certain point the West rediscovered classicism. So they rediscovered Roman authors and Greek authors, and then these authors are in the foundations of the West. And then a small, young Greek nation trying to enter the family of Western countries and trying to liberate itself from the Ottoman image. Now I will it's beautiful. How do we call present-day Israel in different languages? I mean, not only Israel. Israel's Syria, Egypt, all that part of the world. Middle East. Okay. And then, Japanese and Chinese, that's...
Far East.
Okay, so middle and far. So there's something missing.
Near.
Near East. So where is the Near East?
Near to Europe.
Okay. Really? So today, since the Near East ceased to exist, right? There is a mixture of terms, and the term Near East is applied to what was once upon a time Middle East. So sometimes you can call that area of the other side of the Mediterranean Sea Middle East, and sometimes you can call it Near East. But originally, the Eastern question and the Near East were the Balkan countries under Ottoman yoke. They were called Near East because they were on the East. Now you will pay attention that East is identified with Islam. So West is identified with Christianity, and East is identified with Islam. So those people who lived... Yeah.
In Hebrew, we still call it the Mizrach HaKarov.
No, you haven't been...
I went to school.
Oh, yeah. So you haven't been to Israel... Yeah. Today they call it... First of all, Israelis are lazy, so today it's called Mazat. Now Mazat, like Mezeh on the table, no. Mazat like Mizrach HaTichon. Okay, so you abbreviate it and it's Mazat. Now, but no Mizrach HaKarov anymore, and if you would tell to Israeli students today Mizrach HaKarov, they wouldn't have a clue what you are talking about. Now, so, East is identified with Islam, right? Right. Islam ruled in European Turkey, that's the way it was called. Now, European Turkey, at one moment was half Hungary until Vienna, everything until Vienna was part of European Turkey. Okay? So, later the Turks have lost first the Hungary, then Romania, right? Then
The Balkans.
Then one by one countries like Serbia and Montenegro and Greece and Bulgaria and so on. Now, the countries in the Near East wanted to get rid of this Eastern, Eastern ballast, something that was putting them down. So, for example, the Serbs were the only nation in the ex-Near East who established their own king. Others just brought in German kings. Why? They wanted to be nation as European nations. European nations are ruled by Germans, including the British today, right? It's all German aristocracy, right? So European aristocracy to a large extent is German aristocracy. What did the Bulgarians do? They brought a German aristocrat to be a king. What did Romanians do? They brought in a German aristocrat to be a king. What did the Greeks do? They brought in a German aristocrat to be a king. Now, the Greeks knew that there is huge underestimation in the West concerning the Eastern Roman Empire. So that identity was NG for them. It was no good. NG, totally. Why? Because in the West, when you say Byzantine, you are basically saying corrupt. Right? Yeah, it's a synonym. You say, you know, and we should stop those Byzantine ways. Right? So basically, they knew that they cannot proceed with the identity that their people had. Their people had Greek-speaking identity in a Roman shell, right? So they were Greek-speaking Romans. They were Christians. They were devoted Christians. They preferred to be under Ottoman yoke than to join the Catholic Church, because there are huge differences, 2.5 sentences, between the Catholic and the Orthodox Church. Now, why is this important? And just compare it to Israel. The same thing happened in Israel. The national movement knew that enlightened nations don't appreciate us for Talmud. They have suspicion towards Talmud, right? They have suspicions towards Pharisaic Judaism, towards the rabbis, towards the Tzedokites, towards the... Okay, if their Jews are appreciated for something, it's for the Bible. Now, Jews want to enter the family of Western nations. So they claim, okay, direct link to those Jews there who were acceptable and that Europe looks up to. So basically, not only Greek and Israeli flag are same, blue and white, right? It's just that they have 4 points Magen David and we have 6 points cross. But basically, both nations have conducted a serious project of human engineering. Israel took Jews and made them Israelis. Greece took Romaiki and made them Greeks. Now the names, like in modern Greek you say Elas, Eliniki. These names were not used. These names were not used. These names belonged to a pagan ancient past that most Greeks didn't relate to. Most Greeks didn't like naked statues. They had Christian morality. Most Greeks didn't relate at all to Greek mythology. It was not theirs. Their mythology was Eastern Roman mythology. Their ideology was Eastern Roman, their culture, not ideology, their culture was Eastern Roman culture. Okay, now what happens is, and you will see many a time that identity, you know, there is a story, which says, not story, there is a statement which says, Jews might be different than other people, but that's not what makes them Jews. What makes them Jews is that they are different than other Jews. There is a beautiful joke which says a Jewish family moved from Istanbul to Jerusalem, and they lived 50 years. And after 50 years, the husband says to his wife, "Pack our things. We are going back to Istanbul." So she says, "Why?" And he says, "I want to die as a Jew." So she says, "What's the problem with? I mean, if you are, you know." If you, yeah, no, but if you are in such a hurry to die as a Jew, what's the problem with dying as a Jew here? And he says, if I die here, what will they say? Who died? That Turk. Only if I die in Istanbul, they will say that Jew died. Right? Then there is another joke. They caught Chaim Hirsch in Moscow. For espionage for Israel. So they say, what's your name? He says, Chaim Hirsch. They say where you were born, in Moscow, your parents in Moscow, your grandparents in Moscow. Do you have any family abroad? He says, no. Okay, Abraham Hirsch from Tel Aviv, what is he to you? That's my brother. And Sarah Gutman from Haifa, oh, that's my sister. So how come you don't have any family abroad? And he says, well, from the entire family, only I live abroad. Okay? So, what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to show with all those jokes and so on is that identity is not only something that you think about yourself. Identity is also what other people think about you. Right? And human engineering is when you take people from their natural habitat. In other words, I mean, it's stupid to speak about people and, you know, natural habitat, because people are very movable entities. But at the same time, human engineering is when you take people from their natural habitat and you put them someplace else. And then you replace some people that were originally there, right? And you put them on some other place. The same way the Greek and Turkey made exchange of populations. And the same way, basically, Israel and Arab countries made exchange of populations, even though, well, we did to a certain extent. We did, as far as the borders of 48 are concerned. I mean, come on, let's be honest. As far as the borders of 48 are concerned, we did exchange of populations. It's just that in 67, we got back many Arabs that we got rid of in 48. So, if we are to be honest, right? But in 48, State of Israel stayed.
Jordan.
No, State of Israel stayed with miniature Arab population, right? As much as under the exchange of populations, the Greeks of Istanbul were not touched. They were to be kicked a few decades later. But under the exchange of population within Turkey and Greece, those people stayed there. Now, this will have, I'm saying we are wrapping up everything that we mentioned by now. So, you will see that Greek Jews is something that doesn't really exist. Why? Because the Greeks themselves didn't really exist. They are a reinvented nation, right? So Jews existed, but Israelis didn't. Romaiki existed, but Greeks didn't. Now, there were Jews who since always, since the times memorable, lived amongst the Romaiki. And they are called Romaniotes. They are not called Greek Jews. In order to be called Greek Jews, first the Greeks were supposed to be called Greeks. You follow that? Now, the Jews of that entity are called the same way that entity is called. Those people are called Romaiki, so the Jews who live, Romans, right? So the Jews who live among them are Romaniot Jews. Now, Greece is new entity. Nobody is a Greek Jew. And everybody, under the law, is a Greek Jew. Anybody who has Greek citizenship. But this is a new identity. Now, during the Second World War, when we were in that community yesterday, so you could hear how many of the people joined the partisans. It was possible for them. For God's sake, those people spoke Greek for 2,000 years. They didn't have to pose as Greeks. Again, I'm using, right, as new Greeks. Because they were old Romaniotes. So they were Greek. Since always. So they could join the Greek freedom fighters. Now imagine a Ladino-speaking Jew from Salonika. It's like a Jew from Manhattan coming to Normandy. No clue. Now you will say, how come this person didn't speak the language of the country? Which language? Which country? Which language? Which country? He never lived in Greece. He lived in the Ottoman Empire. Now empires don't have one single language. Different groups in an empire have different languages. He spoke his own imperial language. The imperial language of the Jews of the Ottoman Empire was Ladino, and he was very fluent in it. Right? Okay. So what happened is Salonika was taken by the Greek in 1917. Jews were taken by Germans, not by Nazis, by Germans to concentration camps in 1943. Now, I'm not good in mathematics, but that's less than 30 years, right? Okay? So, you don't expect them in 30 years to change totally what they are all about, right? Most of them were not born in Greece. All of them had Greek citizenship because Greek came to their houses. They never went to Greece. Greece came to them. That's the Balkans. There was a beautiful movie, and there was a Berber. He had a Berber shop in Split in Croatia. And he says, a barber shop, yeah. So he says, okay, so he had a whatever shop in Split, and he says, look at this, I never moved from this shop, and 4 states came to visit me. Right? So, because when he was born, it was Austro-Hungarian Empire, then it became Kingdom of Yugoslavia, then it became Kingdom of Slovenians, the Serbs and the Croats, then it became Kingdom of Yugoslavia, then it became the Nazi non-aligned, independent state of Croatia, and so on. So he never moved, and 4 different states came to visit him. So the Jews never moved from Salonika, and then Greece came to visit them. But you didn't expect them in 27 or whatever years to build. I mean, you know, you are Jewish, you come to Israel, you live in Israel for 40 years, and you speak about us and them. Right? And then you say, oh, I have 3 daughters. One is married to a lawyer from Brooklyn, and one is married to a bank accountant from Antwerpen, and one is married to an Israeli. Right? Like, you know, extraterrestrials. Another kind. Right? They are not lawyers, they are not they are Israelis. That says it all. Yeah, that says it all. Okay. So the same way the things were here, and then the so-called Greek Jewish identity was not created from within, was created from without. And I've already told this to a few people who asked me this question. It was created in 3 places, all of them outside of Greece. First, it was created in Auschwitz. They came as Greek to Auschwitz. Everybody referred to them as Greek. So they started seeing themselves as Greek until they died. And all of a sudden they were very proud, because Greece never stripped them of their citizenship. Most of the Jews in concentration camps were stateless. And then, now this is a Jewish sport, you know, like we are both killed as Jews, but I'm killed in better status than you. Yeah, so Jews can play these games, but anyhow, yes, the survivors, I've conducted quite a lot of, personal interviews with Holocaust survivors, and Greek Holocaust survivors are very fast to tell you that, and we were Greek Jews, and we were Greek, and we were Greek, and we were not stripped of our identity, even though for them it was totally new identity. The Jews of Poland were Polish for 1,000 years. The Jews of Greece were Greek for 27. But still, Greece didn't strip them off. And that's something nice about those ancient nations like Italians, like Greek. They had anti-Semitism. We heard about, Christian mob in Chalkidikis, perpetuating the scene of Judas betraying Jesus and then going with torches. And sometimes, it can also damage buildings. But generally, Jews were not killed by the Greeks, as the same way Jews were not killed by the Italians. There is huge difference in the mentality of these peoples between good old theological anti-Semitism and killing the people. So Greeks might have their suspicions towards Jews, but most of the Greeks, most of the time, were helpful. Then one nation could afford saving all its Jews, Bulgaria. I'm speaking of the Balkans. Now, during Bulgaria was run by a German king, as I said previously. Bulgaria captured parts of surrounding countries. So Jews from those countries were said not to have Bulgarian citizenship. Now imagine, you live in Manhattan, okay? France comes and occupies Manhattan, and then you are given to Germans because you don't have French citizenship. Why should you have French citizenship? These people never lived in... Okay, but Bulgarian church could not prevent this. Why? Because these were occupied territories, so Bulgarian church didn't have infrastructure over there to work. But then, when the same king and parliament decided to give away Bulgarian Jews, which means the Jews of old Bulgaria, the church had infrastructure to prevent that. So the archbishop, the patriarch and the metropolitan, the archbishop and bishops gave instructions to the clergy to work against it and to inspire and how to call it, instigate, yeah, the local population against it. And you can see beautiful interviews with Bulgarian priests and Bulgarian monks and Bulgarian higher clergy, speaking very like in very basic terms. Like we were people that was occupied by the Turks. We know what's suffering, and Jews suffered together with us, and they never did anything to anybody, and there is no way we can allow for them to be executed for no reason. And we as Bulgarians cannot have this, or cannot tolerate this. So basically, we see that Jews were highly unready for the dissolvement of the Ottoman Empire. Jews had had good life in the Ottoman Empire. It's not their fault that Ottoman Empire was dissolving. It was not their fault that Ottoman Empire was becoming more and more corrupt and more oppressive. Basically, to be honest, here in the narrative they speak about, oppression of Christian populations. It was much better to be an Orthodox Christian under the Sultan than to be an Orthodox Christian under the Russian Tsar. No doubt about that. For 200 or 300 years, Orthodox Christians had better rights in an Islamic empire than in an Orthodox empire. Therefore, it makes me laugh always when I see Tsar, intervening on behalf of local Christians when he's not doing anything for his own Christians in his own country. However, though, during the last century of its dissolvement, Ottoman Empire became highly corrupt, and the lives of the Christians became intolerable in many places. So the empire was deteriorating, and Jews had to find alternatives. Now, it was very easy for Serbs and Greeks and Bulgarians. Their alternative was very easy. We want to get rid of the Turks and have our own national countries. Now, a shiur in Zionism. Unfortunately, how do you say hasbara in English? Public relations, yes. Yeah, PR. So the state of Israel could do much better if the PR was to use the following 2.5 sentences. Usually they say, how Jews came and displaced the Palestinians and displaced the Arabs and so on, and you cannot come to a country and throw a population, etc. Now we have to understand the question at hand, and if the Ashkenazim who do the Asbara, the PR, were aware of Sephardic history, they would do their job much better. It's very easy to do. You say like this: the same way Izmir was a Greek city whose overwhelming population was Greek, right? But in the split of territories between the Greeks and the Turks within the empire, Izmir ended up being Turkish. Now Istanbul also had huge Greek population. On another side, Salonika, which had tiny Greek community, became Greek. It's not a question, for God's sake, it's not Israel is not a planet. It's not a planet outside of the universe. Israel is part of the Ottoman Empire. Hard to imagine. Many people cannot imagine it, but it's true. For a few hundred years, Beersheba and Belgrade were in the same country. Right. Now, it's not a question how many Jews were in the province, in Jerusalem province of Syria. That's the way, in the internal Ottoman division, right? There was the empire, then empire was divided into provinces, then the province was called Syria, right? And Jerusalem district, the land, what we call today land of Israel, was divided between two districts. So Jerusalem district belonged to Syria. Okay, so the same way we say Greeks lived in the Ottoman Empire, they were so and so percentages of the Ottoman population. Consequently, with the dissolvement of the empire, Greeks were entitled to a certain proportion of the empire. The same is totally true about the Jews. Jews were Ottoman population. And hundreds of thousands of Jews lived in the Ottoman realm. And now the joint house is dissolving, right? And Jews obviously cannot receive 5%, 10% or 60% of every single unit. But there is a unit to which they have historical claims, and to which they also had huge population there, right? But it's not, it was, the dissolvement of the empire was not a Jewish idea. But if it's already happening, right, the Jews should act just like anybody else. Okay, now, one more thing. Jews in Salonika believed that Salonika should become a Jewish republic. During the First Balkan War in 1912, Jews sent their delegation to European powers deciding about Salonika, saying that Salonika should stay international city under the Jewish rule, independent of all other Balkan states around. So it would actually be Jewish republic, right? This didn't happen. Finally, but think of it. Some of the Balkan countries did not face Holocaust. For example, Turkey. Out of 80,000 Turkish Jews, right, 40,000 went to Israel in 48. And then additional 20,000 in subsequent 40 years. So most of the Jews of Istanbul moved to Israel. So whenever you act as emissaries of the state of Israel, explaining to the external world Jewish rights to the land of Israel, don't go back to Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, which is nice, but not really workable. Go back to the Ottoman Empire and say how Jews were one of the nations in the Ottoman Empire, and how empire dissolved, and how Jews were entitled, just like the Serbs, just like the Bulgarians, just like the Albanians, just like the Kurds. Now, Serbs, Bulgarians, Christian nations got it. Albanians fought for it and got it. Kurds didn't got it, and they are getting it now. Okay, so back to other issues that we have touched upon. Modernity.
Can I just interrupt you for a sec, because you said before,
yes,
there were three Greek Jewish identity was created from the outside.
Yes, sorry.
Three.
Yes, and I said Auschwitz.
Correct.
Now, two other places are United States of America, Jews from Greece coming to United States of America, and Romaniotes saying we are Romaniotes, and Sephardim saying we are Sephardim, and then as soon as you have 10 people from one community, they immediately, now, like, you have 5 Salonican Jews, 3 Jews from Monastir, and 2 Jews from Castoria, they still are running something Sephardic. And then 5 additional Jews from Salonika come, and then 10 Jews from Salonika say to the Sephardim bye, and they run their own business. So there was plenty of different Sephardic institutions, and they were separate Romaniote institutions, but Ashkenazim would not have it. For them, and this was the sweet revenge of the Ashkenazim. Okay, now why the sweet revenge? For centuries, Sephardim were psychologically incapable of pronouncing any single Ashkenazi family name. So any person that would come to a Sephardic community and they would call him to Torah and they would ask him what's your name and he would say Shemuel Goldschmidt and they would say Ya'aleh Shemuel Ashkenazi. So all the Goldschmidts and Goldbergs and and Silverschmidt and Silverberg and whatever and Spielberg, they all became Ashkenazi. Okay, now the Ashkenazim were paying back. So they say, oh, so you are Greek. And they say, no, I'm a Salonican. And they say, yeah, which is Greek. And then the other person says, oh, but I'm Romaniot from Yanina. And they say, okay, that's what I was saying, Greek, right? Okay, so
Macedonia.
yeah, oh, even, yeah. Yeah, so in any case, Ashkenazim just wouldn't have any of this Sephardic, Romaniot, ex-Ottoman Jewish crap. For them, if you were from Greece, you were Greek, full stop. And also the Americans treated them that way, right? With major identity crises for many new immigrants, because the immigration officer says Turk, and they say no, we are not Turks, we are Jews, right? And he says, no, I'm improvising, but are you coming from a Jewstan? If you are not coming from a Jewstan, but from Turkey, you are a Turk, whether you like it or not, right? So that's the second place.
Americans call the Sephardic Jew, they call them Syrian Jews. In New York, you just call them Syrian Jews.
Yeah, that's today because of the Syrian community in Brooklyn, but that's something else. Now, another thing. Third place, and the place where the Greek Jewish identity was most successfully invented, was Israel. Israel was trying to put a happy face, right, to a suffering people, and Ashkenazi authors imagined that in city like Salonika, where Jews have been the majority, and they lived in a beautiful climate zone, right, and they worked normal jobs. What does that mean, normal jobs? Because when you have 5% of the population who are Jewish, then all the Jews do the same, right? You know the story, you know the joke. When a Jewish lady comes out of the building and then the neighbor comes and says, oh, your kids are so nice, how old are they? And she said, well, the lawyer is 6 and the doctor is 5. So, but when you have 60, 70 or 80% of population in a certain city Jewish, they can't be all lawyers and doctors. So we had Jewish whores in Salonika, yeah, with W. And we had, yes, and we had Jewish Jews working in the port, and the port was closed on Shabbat because most of the port workers were Jewish, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is, okay, Israelis imagined, just like, and I told this to some of you already in personal discussions, in personal commentaries. Zorba the Greek. Hollywood. Don't bother me with facts. So they invented, it's much easier for the American Hollywood to invent Greek dance than to go to Greek community in New York and to learn about how do the Greeks dance. So they invented Zorba's dance, and then people loved the movie. So they were coming to Greece all over, and they were asking to see Zorba's dance. And there was no Zorba's dance because it was invented. Then finally Greeks gave in. They said, you want to have Zorba's dance? You will pay for that? No problem. We will give you Zorba's dance and a half. Yes.
Well, Sirtaki wasn't invented.
No, the one we'll see.
Yeah.
One of the So Israel did the same thing. You have series of movies with about this guy called Salamoniko, right? And he's basically Greek with Jewish name, because that's the way the Ashkenazi authors imagined Jews in Greece. So he's a Greek. He acts as a Greek. He speaks as a Greek. He's happy as Greek, he's lazy as Greek, he's open-minded as Greek, he's free-spirited as Greek, but he's Greek with Jewish name. And then you look those movies and you say, for God's sake, where do you come with this stuff? Where do you come from with this stuff? This doesn't reflect any reality. But that's the way the things were in Israel, and through, and then people would, you know, tomorrow you go to the supermarket and your neighbor says, "Oh, I saw a movie about you guys yesterday," right? So first 2 weeks you say, "No, that's not us. That's not real. That's not okay." But then you start acting it because that's good. All of a sudden you are recognized in Israel. It doesn't matter that this recognition is totally wrong, but it's you. I mean, it's not real you, but at least there is a place for you. It's how do you call it? A falsified place. I'll give you one example. To my mind, some of the best literature produced today is literature produced by the Christian Arabs kicked out of the Middle East to the West, United States or Europe. It seems to be that for good literature you need good suffering. Otherwise it's just I mean, if your life is boring, your literature is boring. So these people didn't have boring lives. Consequently, they have beautiful literature. So just look for a few names like Rafiq Shami, Khalil Gibran, and what's his name? Rabih Alameddin. Rabih Alameddin. Now this guy, Rabih Alameddin, writes about the Lebanese Christian community in America. And he says the only reason these people speak Arabic is because they live in America. If they lived in Lebanon, they would speak French or English. Because they all belong to high society. Right? So they needed to be different. When they are in Lebanon, they are different because they speak French and Arabic. Now you come to America, everybody speaks English. Right? So what do? You speak Arabic. So he says, there's this famous painter who became the most known American abstract painter. Right? And there is a newcomer from Lebanon, and they take him to his exhibition, and he's looking at the pictures, and he says, "Oh, look at this valley of Back. Oh, look at that Beirut." And they tell him, "You must be kidding. He's an abstract artist, and all of these are abstract pictures." And he says, "Abstract my ass. I can see this from my window." So they call the author, and they say, "Here there is some crazy guy from Lebanon saying that he recognizes things from Beirut and from Lebanon on your pictures." And he says, "Don't let him go." And he runs there, he hugs him, and he says, "Let's go for a dinner." And he says, "But they think your pictures are abstract." And he says, "Let the Gentiles think whatever they want." Now, what does that mean, let the Gentiles think whatever they want? If you live in the country to which you were born, you might proceed for a few decades with the idea that eventually you will get understood. Right? Then you give it up and you say, people will never understand me. But when you move to another country, right, you give up much faster. They will just not understand you. End of story. So this guy wants to survive. For nostalgical reasons, he's painting Lebanon. But this is recognized as abstract art. Okay, call it whatever you want, just let me survive. Now that's exactly what I'm saying about the Jews, Greek Jews in Israel. Call me whatever you want, just let me survive. Or this recognition of Greek Judaism gave them place under the Israeli sun, and slowly but surely they entered those shoes that Israeli society left for them. And now, genuinely, people speak about themselves as Greek Jews. Makes me laugh. Right? But they speak about themselves as Greek Jews. I mean, imagine that. People who lived in Greece for 27 years, they lived in Israel more than they lived in Greece. I mean, if somebody is from Salonika, okay, how can he be a Greek Jew? Greece was there for 27 years, and he is not there anymore. But now they are Greek Jews because it was identity created from without. So, I wanted to say a few words also about modernity and tradition and so on. These are very interesting phenomena. Basically, the Sephardic Jews are the most secular community amongst all Jewish communities. Not only it never split into Orthodox, Conservative and Reform, but basically just like the surrounding Balkan nations, religion was considered something that belongs to the past. People were religious because they didn't know things. it's very interesting. The Sephardic relation to religion is very similar to the Greek relation to religion, to the Serbian relation to religion, to the Bulgarian. There is a beautiful story about that. I mean, people recognize this, so they are even making jokes about it. They say a person dies, he goes to heaven, and then there is an angel that shows him around. So the angel says to him, that's a Nagdish synagogue in heaven, right? And that's a Hasidic synagogue. And that's whatever, and that's Libyan synagogue, and that's Yemenite synagogue, and now shut up. So he shuts up, and then they make few steps, and then the guy proceeds again, and he says, and this is Iraqi synagogue, and this is a Kurdish synagogue. He says, but why did we shut up previously? He says, we were passing by Bulgarian synagogue. So he says, so why did we have to shut up? Oh, they don't believe in heaven. So in heaven, nobody wanted them molested, so nobody told them that they were actually in the same heaven in which they don't believe. So basically, the Jews of Yugoslavia, I remember when I came to Israel for a summer course, and at that time I was wearing kippah, and then a few other friends who were in process of becoming more observant, they were also having kippot, but at that moment in my room at Hebrew University, there were all 5 Yugoslav Jews wearing kippah in the world. All 5 of them were in that room. And then this obviously gave a wrong impression to my roommates, because they imagined that everybody's like that. And then ordinary, normal Yugoslav Jew comes in, and my roommate tells him, so you are also Yugoslavian? He says, yes. And he says, well, interesting, you don't have kippah. He says, oh, any Jew you see from now, any Yugoslavian Jew you see from now will not have kippah. Okay, so basically today in the world, there are maybe 10 people from Sephardic tradition and Sephardic communities who have rabbinical semicha. Now, I have 7 more minutes. I want us to understand the process. This first happened amongst the Western Sephardim. Who are the Western Sephardim? Frederica and Jack here can tell us, because their daughter-in-law is running such a synagogue. Spanish and Portuguese. Now, Spanish and Portuguese, as early as 18th century, already did not have any kids going to rabbinical schools. So what they were doing, the same thing they are doing today, they were buying for good money Ashkenazi rabbis, and then they were playing social game of forcing Ashkenazi rabbis teaching Sephardic tradition. And first of all, those Sephardic rabbis needed to teach themselves. And the community took special special pleasure in developing sadomasochistic relation with the rabbi. So I was there like 2 or 3 years ago, when they just acquired Rabbi Soloveitchik. I'm saying acquired because the same terminology should be used as the terminology for the football players, right? So they always acquire the Maradona of the moment, and then they tell him, but we want you to be, imagine you take Maradona, right? He's from Latin America, and then you say, but we want you to be British, and we want you to speak with British accent. So that's what they are doing to this guy. And when I was there when they were training him, and the entire community takes part in this sadomaso relationship. So the rabbi says, and then Rabbi Akiva said, so they tell him, Ribi. So he says, then Ribi Akiva said, then they say, Akiva. So he says, then Rabbi Akiva said, but then he forgot what Rabbi Akiva said because it's totally unnatural. He needs to say Rabbi Akiva in order to get to the Talmudic passage or to the Mishnaic passage. But if he says Rabbi Akiva, that's like saying Frankenstein said. And Frankenstein didn't say anything. So, okay. But Spanish and Portuguese, there is a reason why, it's anecdotes, but it builds a picture. If you go to a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, you will see the rabbis are called reverend, right? And they are all paid by the community. Community doesn't obey them. They obey the community, and community tells them what they should be doing. And if they don't do that, then they are fired. But in order to make this extremely clear to everybody on a daily basis, the service starts with rabbis reading Tehillim, and that's something they are allowed to do on their own, as if it was a service at the kotel. Then, the president of the community dressed like Uncle Sam, you know, with cylinder and everything, and the vice president of the community, right? They sit in front of the echal on both sides of the gates, and then when the formal part of the liturgy is about to start, the rabbi gets up and he bows to the president of the community, and then the president of the community tells him, "You may start." And then he starts. And then for the reading of the Torah, right?
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, for the reading of Torah, they go to the echal, they open the echal and so on, but yad for the reading is with the president. And then the president of the community brings the yad and gives them, and they bow down, and then now they can read Torah. So it's all show run by secular leadership of the community, and being the fact that the rabbis were undermined by the community, nobody wanted to send their kids to be rabbis. Why would you send your kids to be rabbis to be put down by the... So what they did, ever since 18th century, I mean, today they are making a joke. So when Rabbi Soloveitchik was acquired, they call him De Soloveitchik. Because there is a previous famous Spanish and Portuguese rabbi called De Solapol. But I have news for you. De Solapol himself was Ashkenazi. Yeah. So now they want De Soloveitchik to act as De Solapol, but they were both Ashkenazi, paid by the Spanish and Portuguese community to keep traditions which are not their own. And which the community... Okay, so I could go for 2 hours telling you stories about that, because they are very... The service there looks like a combination of Freemason lodge, a museum, and Catholic church. Like combine those three together, and you will have impression of what's Spanish and Portuguese. And then Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was newly acquired, he comes with his modern Orthodox kind of aesthetics, which is much better than Haredi, right? But it's still far away from Spanish and Portuguese. So can you imagine? He comes with nylon thing with lulav. Now that synagogue doesn't allow for nylon. You can't bring anything which is not, which is not natural element. So the gabbai goes to him, and if the guy was having hittulim, he takes his lulav and says, "Allow me." And with the face of he puts it aside, and the rabbi says, "But I will need it later." So he says, "Of course you will." And then for Hallel, they bring him on the silver plate, right? They bring him lulav with etrog on a silver stander, right? And the rabbi, who is an American, says, "Wow, this is awesome," which is not part of the Spanish and Portuguese protocol. Anyhow, now I'm back to the Sephardim, and I'm ending with the story.
Great guy.
He's a great guy, I know. The Soloveitchik is a great guy. Now, no, I'm not. That's what community is doing. That's the game they play. That's the game they play. They opened. Okay. Well, the Solapol original, the Solapol also handled it. There is a lot of glamour and there is a lot of money around this.
Ceremony then.
Yeah, of course.
Keep ceremony.
Yes, I know. So in any case, we can understand from the Spanish and Portuguese, who were the first Sephardim to develop this mentality, what happened later with the rest of Eastern Sephardim, Ladino speakers. I'm not speaking obviously of Jews of Yemen or of Jews of Iraq. So these people adopted French outlook, right? According to which the age of reason came. And there is no place for religion, ever since there is place only for tradition and culture. My rabbi, the rabbi with whom I've learned, was not necessarily religious. He saw Judaism as culture. He was traditional Sephardic rabbi, but traditional Sephardic rabbi at that point in time meant Judaism is culture. So he would deliver a speech in the synagogue on Yom Kippur saying that Amos was the first prophet who said that the land should belong to people who work on it, and so on. So he finishes the speech, and then he comes to me and he says, "Did you like the drasha?" I say, "Yes." He says, "Have you paid attention? I never mentioned God." Right? So, now, as somebody who grew up in the community, I had the opportunity to listen to today, just like in Turkey and just like in Bulgaria, and right? We have Israeli trained rabbis. Now, Yugoslavia is different because Israeli trained rabbis are locals who were trained. The same way Serbs didn't bring German king, but they had local king become German aristocrat. So the same way they send kids to Israel to learn, and they come back as local rabbis. In the rest of the communities, usually just as we saw in Salonika, these are Israeli rabbis, right? But basically, having new rabbis trained in Israel, in the Balkans, is totally new phenomena. And then the first previous generation of rabbis, the rabbis that we learned from, none of them was religious. They were extremely precocious about ceremonial things, just like Spanish and Portuguese. And I will not mention names because people might think it's putting down, but a prominent person in that community who is of Spanish and Portuguese descendants. So he speaks with me, and he keeps telling everybody that's wrong, you shouldn't do that way. First you go with your right hand. He knows the ritual by heart. And then it was during Chol HaMoed Sukkot, we will meet for the lunch. So we meet in front of his enterprise, and he says, do you insist we go kosher? So I say, well, there is plenty of kosher restaurants, so I don't see, but I can also eat some salad. He says, well, personally, I can also eat calamari. I'm Orthodox only in the synagogue. Okay, so no, but you can laugh as much as you want, but there is plenty of Jews, and this is very typical for Sephardim. They are very. I'll give you one more example. When I was a kid in the community, the community was communist, right? Mm-hmm. And we still had services. And then a Reform rabbi, woman, comes to the community, and she speaks with our secretary, who is, secretary of the Jewish youth. And she says, well, I would like to take part in the service. And then we all laugh, because it was laughable to imagine the old-timers having a woman rabbi. It's unimaginable. They don't believe in anything, but they wouldn't allow for a female rabbi. So we told her, listen, let the old-timers finish their prayer. Once they are done and they go home, we can have egalitarian prayer with youngsters. So the old-timers come to the synagogue. She comes to the synagogue to be there for the old-timers prayer. So she sits at Azarat Nashim. Now, at that moment in Azarat Nashim were at least 7 or 8 half-deaf, very old women who used to gossip during the entire service, speaking in very high voices because they couldn't hear each other. Nobody was ever bothered by this, right? So anybody enters the synagogue and they say, ¿Quién es este? Nieto de quién es? No lo conoces? Whatever, and in very high voices. And then at a certain point, the female rabbi starts singing Lecha Dodi with the rest of the community. And then the entire community turns to her and they tell her, shh. Okay, so these same people will then come out and smoke in front of the building with no problem. But in the synagogue, you do it the old way. So, yes, so this is a phenomenon that nobody ever explained. Articles should be written about what happened first with Western Sephardim and then with Ladino speakers. But it's a matter of fact that the tradition stopped. That most of the Sephardim, at certain point in time, by the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, most of the Sephardim, especially the young, believed that Judaism is folklore. And that in our age of reason, there is no... Okay, so the rabbi with whom I've learned, he's a son of a rabbi, a grandson of a rabbi, a great-grandson of a rabbi. So he was made by his family go to the rabbinical seminary. And what he was doing in the rabbinical seminary was disseminating communist literature. Because personally, he was a communist. So this is something for all of us to think about. There are no answers to this. We know where it came from. It came with entire positivist, rational approach to the world. And today, only on few places you have local rabbis who learned from local rabbis. It's mostly either Israeli rabbis or locals who were trained in Israel after the fall of the communism. Okay, thank you.
So the
rabbi here was trained in Israel, your friend, and came back to the community. He was originally from
But
here.
yes, certainly. So he belongs to that type. Local guy who was already very educated in Judaism, who is coming from highly traditional family, and then he goes to Israel and returns.
The other thing is also the Bulgarian Jews, or the Bulgarian kingdom, did outside of the country participate in the killing of the...
Of course, all the Jews of New Bulgaria, so-called, in other words, Jews of occupied territories, were given to the Germans. Certainly, yes.
In our language, it is very mixed. No